Howdy, friends. Welcome back to Feedstuffs 365. Andy Vance joining you from Lexington, Kentucky, site of this year's Alltech 1 conference. Good to be back in person with friends from around the feed industry, the global feed industry, and joining us one of Alltech's key leaders and really one of the experts in antimicrobial resistance, Dr. Richard Murphy with the Dunboyne Research Center of Alltech in Alltech Europe. Let's start off, Dr. Murphy, a little bit about what you and your colleagues do at Dunboyne for folks who are maybe not familiar with the center and your work there.
So I guess the team in Dunboyne has a couple of key research teams and research strands that we work on. Organic minerals, trace elements of minerals is a key area for us. We do quite a lot of work as well with crop science. But I think our biggest research program at the moment is gut health. And really we're focused on trying to understand how we can harness or unleash the power of the microbiome. And really in doing so then how we can use that as a way in which we can control pathogens and restrict the growth of pathogens and ultimately try and control the level of resistance that some of those pathogens may or may not harbour, and really look at employing this as a way in which we can make a food safer.
Looking at this topic of gut health as it relates to microbial resistance, antimicrobial resistance, what's the kind of state of the union, as it were, currently in terms of how much do we know, how much more do we know now than we did 2-3 years ago, and how big do we think our gap of knowledge is yet? I know as a researcher you're going to say there's always more research to do, and that's right, but how big do you think our knowledge gap is in this really important area yet?
I think in many ways there may be somewhat of a disconnect when we look at organizations like DANMAP, for instance, or when we look at the ECDC, or when we look at the USDA here in the US. There's an extent of knowledge about the prevalence of resistance, and there's an extent of knowledge about how big the problem is. But how do we go about removing that problem? That's the key area for us. And certainly I think there have been great moves and great strides in reducing the use of antibiotics. So we see worldwide decrease in the amount of antibiotic that's used in animal and livestock production. But we don't typically see a decrease in the prevalence of resistance among organisms that harbour resistance. So I guess the key message is that resistance is persistent. And there's a lot of really, really good long-term studies which basically show that even with decreasing use of antimicrobials and antibiotics, that high level of prevalence amongst organisms like E. coli, Salmonella and Campylobacter is persistent. And that's the key challenge for us. How do we combat resistance among pathogens that have food safety implications? And certainly that's an area that we're really, really focused on in Dunboyne is to look at pathogen control, but also to try and apply our knowledge on pathogen control to those organisms that have antimicrobial resistance.
You and I, as we were preparing for this talk, quite a bit about Campylobacter. That certainly is one globally that's very important. What are the pathogens you think are maybe the biggest challenges for us to try to overcome, and what are we learning about the role the gut plays in helping us deal with those critters?
Yeah, I do think that the three key ones obviously are Campylobacter, Salmonella and E. coli. Quite high levels of resistance among ISIS that are found in food-producing animals, whether it's broilers, whether it's turkeys, whether it's beef, and so on. And certainly what we have focused on in Dunboyne is to try and look at ways in which we can enable much greater pathogen control in our production animals, but without the use of antimicrobials. And that's a key for us. And certainly what we focused on has been the concept of colonization resistance, and basically using the microbiome as a way in which we can get, if you like, an innate pathogen control. Our work primarily focuses on trying to expand the diversity of the gut microflora, and obviously that plays really well with the whole concept of colonization resistance. When you make the microbiome a much more diverse, much more rich population of bacteria, then you get much greater control of pathogens in an innate fashion. We've done a lot of work across multiple species at this stage: broilers, turkeys, layers, swine. We've even started to do quite a bit of work on the ruminant side. And in all cases, what we've found is that there is a direct link or a direct correlation between control of pathogens when you enable a much more diverse microbiome. Some of the newer work that we've had is really beginning to get quite exciting, because we're not just seeing control of pathogens like E. coli, Salmonella and Campylobacter. We've now identified other organisms which we get much greater control of when we expand that microbiome diversity. So C. difficile, for instance, Listeria, Helicobacter, these are organisms which have very important food safety implications, and certainly from a producer's point of view, these are the organisms that we really want to target. At the same time, and we've talked a bit about the resistance rates and the high level of resistance that remains in E. coli, Salmonella and Campylobacter. Again, what we found, when you restrict those pathogens, you actually restrict the AMR that's associated with them. So when you've got less Salmonella, you'll have less resistant Salmonella, and that's a really key message, I think, that in order to control the persistent problem that is AMR amongst pathogens, you need to control the pathogens. And that's the key challenge, I think, for the industry, is pathogen control as a way in which we can reduce resistant pathogens at the same time.
Well, kudos to you and your colleagues, and thank you for taking on the important work. Certainly it's a big lift and a lot more work to be done. We'll look forward to future conversations to learn how the research is progressing. Dr. Richard Murphy, who runs the Dunboyne lab, part of Alltech's global research and innovation apparatus. You can listen to more of our conversations with industry leaders like Dr. Murphy by visiting Feedstuffs365.com. We'll have more coverage of the Alltech One conference in Lexington there. From Kentucky, I'm Andy Vance for Feedstuffs.